how do we increase the number of people who have chosen to come into the sector as their career?
We need to do more, and I think the Choose Housing campaign is where we can really push the button on that.
Is it an issue of exposure? Do people just not know about the sector?
There is so many other ways you can get into housing as a sector especially. You don't necessarily have to do the kind of generic university route to be able to get there.
Really, housing, the world's your oyster. You can do as much or as little as you want to. The opportunities are there.
It's really important, for me anyway, to have something of real purpose and something that actually I think makes a difference in the world.
I can think of just a few people that I've worked with that even them alone would just encourage me to still work in social housing.
The most rewarding feeling for me is putting the keys into people's hands. There's no better feeling than changing people's lives.
The one thing that I do want people to take away from this campaign is that
Okay, welcome everybody, and welcome to the HIP podcast. Today we've got a special roundtable. We're hosted by the new Chartered Institute for Housing President Elly Hoult and a panel of future housing leaders, I suppose. We're aiming to discuss the Choose Housing campaign, its aims. We'll ask the panel a little bit about their journey into the sector, what they love about it, but also some of the challenges that they faced, and we're going to try and think about a few ways that we can encourage more people into the housing sector. From our perspective, Anderson, James, we're a talent business, and we hear all the time from maybe even from some of you on the panel that people fell into social housing, and obviously there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I guess what we'll be talking about today and Elly's goals is how do we increase the number of people who have essentially chosen to come into the sector as their career. So it'd be good to just start with some introductions. Elly, would you mind giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself and a bit of an intro to the Choose Housing campaign?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Elly Hoult, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Peabody Trust and the current President of the Chartered Institute of Housing. The Choose Housing campaign is so personal to me because I grew up in social housing, but housing has also given me a career filled with purpose, and I really want more people just to see the incredible opportunities that this sector, our sector, has to offer. As you alluded to, Andrew, so many of us fell into housing rather than actively choosing it, and that included me. And I think that needs to change, and we need to do a much better job of showcasing housing as a first choice career. You can make a tangible difference in people's lives. You can build a rewarding and varied career. It's not just about housing officers and repairs. It spans sustainability, community development, digital skills, policy, and so much more. And there's a space for everyone, and we absolutely need to attract a new generation of talent. Some, like many of the young people on this podcast, who bring fresh perspectives and lived experience also into the sector.
Yeah, thank you, Elly. And I think reflective of that, we have quite a wide-ranging panel of experiences and backgrounds. So I guess let's move on and get some introductions, if we don't mind. So, Jazz, would you mind just introducing yourself, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. My name is Jazz. I'm a housing officer for Barcud Housing Association in Powys, and I also won the CIH Young Achiever in Housing Award in 2024.
Lovely, thanks. Lovely to have you, Jazz. Owen, I'll come to you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. My name is Owen, and I work for Co-operative Housing Ireland, who are one of Ireland's largest approved housing bodies or housing associations. I work as a Neighbourhood Specialist, which is a specialised housing officer role, and I predominantly focus on allocations and lettings and estate management and tenancy management.
Thanks, Owen. Patrick.
Hi everyone, Patrick here. I'm Housing Community Development and Engagement Officer at Brent Council, and it's two parts of the role. One part is focused on community development, which is everything from the new developments that are built in Brent Council, making sure that social value commitments are being held and accounted for, really. And then there's the other part, which is the engagement, which is making sure that residents are part of the housing service and see the improvements that they would like to see within the housing service. So that's me.
Thanks, Patrick. And last but not least, Tamzin, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, I am Tamzin. I work for Flagship Housing Group. We're a housing association that covers the east of England. And currently I am a Placemaking and Regeneration engagement officer, which sits in our Regeneration team.
Lovely. Thanks, everyone, and welcome to the HIP podcast. So I guess we'll kick things off. One sort of element of the Choose Housing campaign is to highlight the varying different routes in and the variety of journeys that people can take. So I thought we'd kick off by just understanding how some of you guys found yourself working in our sector. So Jazz, I'm keen to know a little bit about how you arrived into working in housing.
Yeah, so when I was little, my parents fostered children. So even from like a very young age, I was sort of very aware of the fact that not all children could be cared for by their parents. And it was just that kind of social care kind of knowledge, like I said, from a very young age. I always did quite well in school, but exams were always my downfall. I just find them really, really stressful, and I used to just get completely overwhelmed by them. Like while I was studying for psychology and law at A-level, I like distinctly remember being sat at my kitchen table at home, just like crying into a psychology textbook, just like not productive at all. And I just got so stressed out by the exams that I couldn't even get the bus to go to school. And my dad ended up having to take like the morning off work to drive me like 15 miles to the exam because I just could not cope to get on the bus. Between finishing my exams and getting my results, I decided that university wasn't for me, and that another 3 years of exams just wasn't worth the stress that I was putting myself under. So I got 2 unconditional offers from my top two university choices and decided not to go. I worked in multiple jobs for the next sort of year. I was a buyer at Laura Ashley for a while, and I loved it, but there was just something more that I wanted. So I started at Barcud in the asset management team. I knew that as soon as I started in social housing that I wanted to be a housing officer. I just really admired all the housing officers that were part of the association, and I looked up to them quite a lot. During the pandemic, I self-funded the CIH level 2, and that kind of started everything. That kicked everything off for me, really. Halfway through the level 3 course, which was what work provided for me, I got the offer of a temporary job as a housing officer, which I took, and I was later made permanent, and I haven't really looked back since. And as much as I never really intended on a career in housing, I can kind of see how I've ended up here, sort of since 10 years ago when I was like crying into a psychology textbook.
It's incredible to hear that you sort of self-funded initially. Thanks so much, Jazz. Owen, what about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm probably like a lot of people in the sense that I completely fell into housing. I suppose that is something we need to get away from. And I strongly echo the words of Elly and yourself earlier. My initial background was in furniture design. I came out of school and did an undergraduate in industrial design in Ireland's leading art college. I absolutely loved it. I love creating things. However, I just felt that it wasn't delivering meaningful experiences for me. So I spent a few years working in Dublin city centre, and during this time, commuting in and out of the city, I was hyper aware and highly conscious of the amount of rough sleepers, and the homelessness epidemic in Ireland is really prevalent in the city centre, and you can't not notice it, basically. So I wanted to do something that would obviously become meaningful for me. So I undertook a master's degree in sustainable development in Technological University Dublin. That covered a broad range of sustainable development issues around environmentalism, social sustainability and economic sustainability. I decided to write my master's research paper on the effect of local professional Irish football clubs on their wider communities. So it wasn't just about the sport itself, it was about how these football clubs impacted their communities in terms of enhancing social cohesion and, working in community development. And one large facet that I noticed that these football clubs worked on was housing and how they supported individuals and families in their communities with regards to housing options. And that's what really sparked my interest in housing, to say. So I came out of the master's degree, and I instantly went looking for jobs in housing. A graduate program called For Purpose picked me up basically, and they notified me that there was a job available in Co-operative Housing Ireland as a housing officer graduate. So I did a year of shadowing other experienced professionals in that organisation, and then they eventually took me on as a full-time housing officer. And since then, I've then specialised as a neighbourhood specialist. So my journey has been completely unpredictable, but like Jazz, I can see how I've ended up here, and there's a clearer picture now in terms of where I want to be and where I stand in my career at the moment.
Lovely. Thanks, Owen. Elly, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so there's so many similarities in the stories, which is quite interesting for me. I mentioned earlier that I grew up in social housing, so I really understood the importance of it, but I had no idea that there were roles. The only thing I suppose I sort of knew there were roles at the council. That was, you might get a job at the council. So I left school at 16, and I took an admin job at a small housing association called Cherwell Housing Trust, and I just thought it would be a temporary role. I'd had no idea what I wanted to do. I was just happy to be earning money, to be honest. But once I started, very much like Jazz and Owen's story to some extent, I was like, wow, there's these jobs called housing officers, and they do these really amazing, exciting things every day. And every day they're coming back with these stories about how they've changed lives, or they've supported a resident to get benefits, or they've moved a new family into their home. And I just thought, this is really where I want to be. So I sort of applied for what was called a supported housing officer role then. They do still exist now, but they are the lack of funding compared to what it was like 25 years ago is staggering. And I was really fortunate to work with what were called mother and baby units then, so young mums with their babies, young men on probation who were at risk of going back to jail, and young 16 to 25-year-olds. So I really cut my teeth in that area, and I do believe that many of the skills that I learned early in my career as a housing officer are like so relevant to the role that I do now, and have propelled my career. It's an amazing job. It's really grounding, and it just gives you just such a broad range of skills and experiences that I just can't see that you would get in other jobs or other professions. It's just so unique. So I fell into housing, and then I fell in love with housing.
Thanks. And what I love there, I suppose, is just that the fact that I think, and some of the stories that people have shared already, is that there are skills that people would probably not necessarily always associate with housing, but actually it requires such an array of skills that actually we can sort of pick from a whole raft of experiences that people have had so far. Patrick, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey so far.
I initially started when I graduated from uni. My first jobs were in marketing sales, and that was my key focus, really. I thought I just wanted to be in that sector, and after a few roles, money is fine and everything like that, but there was no real value. It didn't really match my values, my behaviors, the things I really cared for on a day-to-day basis. And unfortunately, I had a mental health breakdown during that time, and I used that time really to kind of consider and really reflect on what I wanted to do in terms of my career. So I kind of just I just wanted to be in marketing, and I just kind of went gun ho, but not really thinking about why I wanted a job like that. And we spend so much time at work, I spend more time at work than I do family members. So, it's really important to for me anyway, to have something with a bit of purpose and something that actually I think makes a difference in the world. So yeah, that was my kind of initial kind of foundation of looking for just looking for a job that involved making a difference to people's lives, improving the community. That was my kind of overall goal. So that could have led me to anywhere, really. That could have been somewhere in the NHS. I could have been a OT, they're helping people that way. I could have went into different sectors, but I was looking at the charity jobs website, and a job came up where I've lived in social housing all my life. I still live in social housing, and this estate that I lived in at the time, I saw a role come up regarding house service centre advisor for Neil Housing, and they manage a Barcud estate where I was born and raised, really. And I thought, oh, perfect, I have no idea what that role is, but I lived on the estate. I can just talk about the estate and they'd be like, oh, this guy's done his research and he knows what he's talking about. So I initially had no idea what, and same thing as Elly just said, she lived in social housing, but had no idea of the kind of behind the scenes bit. I had the same thing, no idea what happens in the office and all that. Applied for the role, got the role, and then that's really started my journey. So same sentiments as everyone's repeated. I like to stay away from saying I fell into housing. I like to think housing chose me, to be very cheesy. Don't throw up there, but yeah, that's my thinking really. Where I'm so happy to be in the role at the moment. I couldn't imagine working anywhere else. Where on a day-to-day basis, I'm doing things that can improve communities and getting people together and making sure that we're making a difference in to the people we serve, really, to the people that pay their rent on a regular basis and that they see some kind of difference in where they live. So yeah, that's my real journey really in the sector, and really happy to be here.
Thanks for sharing, Pat, and particularly thanks for sharing some quite personal experiences there, Patrick. I'll come back to something you've just touched on about a couple of people so far who have lived experience of social housing, but I just want to bring in Tamzin just as an intro, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Hi Tamzin, would you mind just giving a little bit of an insight into, I guess, your journey so far?
Sure. Much like most, I was studying in the midst of COVID. I was actually reading criminology with psychology at university, having no idea what I wanted to do. And it was getting close to the time where I needed to start thinking about what I was going to do after. And a family member actually sent me the role for an antisocial behaviour officer for Flagship, which I applied for and went through the interview process, but unfortunately wasn't successful. But the people or the managers of that team were able to see that I did have some kind of transferable skills that could be used. And it was more of like a lack of experience. I'd worked in like retail all throughout university and I didn't have any of that kind of professional experience. So they actually took me on as a team coordinator. So I supported the officers with a lot of the admin work, a lot of the risk assessing for kind of vulnerable individuals in our service. And I did that for about a year. And then an officer role came up, which is very exciting, great timing for me. And I did go for that and ended up getting that, obviously with the help of all the relevant experience I'd had for the whole year that I'd been in the team already. So I'd done a lot of shadowing and knew a lot of the team, which I think really, really helped. So I was then a Safe Communities Officer, they're called. I think they go by lots of different names depending on where you are. So yeah, I was Safe Communities Officer. I did that for about 2 years. And then I say recently because it feels like recently, but it's not anymore. About 7 months ago, I went for another role internally in our Regeneration team for a Placemaking and Regeneration officer, which I actually knew about because the projects, some of the bigger projects our team are working on, were in my patch where I was a Safe Communities Officer. So I kind of had some involvement there when it came to trying to design out the crime and when they wanted some input on kind of some localized knowledge of the area. So I have fluttered around. I've done 3 roles in my 4 years in social housing already, but it's the best thing. It's so enjoyable and I find it crazy that I still work for the same company, but I just do something so completely different.
Thanks, Tamzin. And I think we'll come back to that in a moment, that sort of breadth of opportunities that the sector offers. But I just really wanted to pick up on something that both Elly and Patrick mentioned about their lived experience of either previously or still living in social housing. Elly, how important is it, do you feel, that the sector maintains that cohort of people who either have or still live in social housing? And what does it mean for the sector?
It's so important. I mean, it's really difficult, I think. I mean, I can only imagine it from my own perspective, which was growing up in social housing. I do think it's really difficult to put yourself into other people's shoes when you haven't had that experience. So I think we have brilliant teams who do great jobs with empathy and with trying to understand our residents, but there's nothing quite the same as having experienced something yourself, and that means that you can really ensure that the residents get a voice, that they are, I'm in such a privileged position now. I'm in such a privileged position. I couldn't look my parents in the face every day if I wasn't doing my damnedest to make sure that every resident had a really high quality home that was suitable for their family and their needs. So there's a kind of passion that sits there. But more broadly, I think the point around having diversity in organisations is key. So that's diversity of, we often talk about colour and we often talk about gender, and actually this podcast is focused on age, but we don't very often talk about socioeconomic and how important that is, and how important it is to get different experiences around the table. So I'm a really big believer in that, and I think right now having residents, there are lots of people at Peabody residents who work in and around our communities, which means that they've really got a stake in that community and what happens there. So yeah, that would be my view.
Lovely, thanks. Yeah, and I think it continues to be a challenge for the sector, doesn't it, to continue to attract people. Not only the best talent, but equally the best talent from the communities in which they serve.
Yeah, I mean, I actually find that a bit bizarre, really. I don't think we've worked hard enough on that. I'm going to be honest, right? Peabody, we've got our resident base is the same population size as Reading, right? So there is going to be a lot of people within our resident base that have masses of potential that would make great advocates in our communities, and we are doing some work on that. But we need to do more. And I think the Choose Housing campaign is where we can really push the button on that and start recruiting from our communities, the people that really understand what it means to kind of live and work there.
Yeah, brilliant. And so I'd love to just come on to you, Patrick. So obviously your experiences of growing up and I think you mentioned still living in social housing, how do you think that has impacted the way you approach your current role and your career at the minute?
Like Elly said, it means like everything really, because from the get-go, it really doesn't take much for me to really have that resident focus mindset. It's really not something I even think about. It's just part of my DNA. Is just how I work on a day-to-day basis. So, that can come out in different ways practically, but it's really at the end, really thinking of how our service is going to benefit residents and whatever we're doing. I work at Brent Council at the moment. There's about 149 languages spoken in Brent Council. It's a very diverse place. Diversity, inclusion, equality is just part of how I work really. So that side of it is a big part. But also really thinking on the other end and thinking, I have spoken to neighbours that are really struggling at the moment. I remember during COVID. And before COVID, actually, I used to manage a hardship fund. And one key thing at the time when we managed it was we were providing vouchers, just everyday vouchers that you can use, but only in like Iceland and very particular supermarkets. And, something like that, I thought, I'm sure there's a better way to distribute this. I'm sure we can find a way of providing, cash or something where it's just more flexible and provides that trust between the resident and the landlord. So it's something where, where possible, I'm always thinking of ways that we can improve the service. And we did at that time introduce that. We trialed it. We were able to provide cash payments where possible to residents. And something as small as that, but it really shows, this gives them a bit of dignity. You can imagine if you just have a voucher for one place and actually shop in the market or you shop in Aldi or something, just having that kind of trust from the free housing provider and little things like that goes a long way to build trust with residents. So yeah, that's me really. The EDI and all that kind of things is not something I have to think about. It's just part of how we work really on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah. Thanks. Elly, did you want to come in on something there?
I just think that the point around dignity, and is such a we talk quite often around the demonisation of people in social housing, and that still is very much exists. That marginalisation of residents. Thankfully, I don't see it in our organisation. That's not, and that is one of the really good things about working in social housing. You're surrounded by people that care and want to make a difference and want to address the issues that that Patrick outlined. So I just think it's really important that we having people with lived experience. For me, is mandatory, not optional.
Sure, 100%. And I suppose then, obviously, we've got a bit of an idea then, so of people's sort of roots into the sector. And I'm keen to move the conversation on to what experiences people have had now they're here. Tamzin, I think you touched on something that I guess that you sort of arrived in one area in ASB and that you now find yourself in sort of a regeneration style role. Just give us a bit of an insight, I guess, then into what you love about the sector maybe and how what you found.
So, like I said, having obviously 3 different roles in 4 years just goes to show the variety that is available. I think a lot of it is about just people not really knowing what there is out there to do. I mean, I've worked here for 4 years and I still don't know half of the roles, and I just think that goes to show how much variety there is and how transferable the skills that you do learn actually are. Coming from a role in antisocial behaviour that is can be quite an emotive role, very much on the front line, and the stories and the experiences and the people that you meet is just amazing. That the people is colleagues, residents, other professionals. I could talk about them all day. I just like meeting people. So the stories and the things that you see, I think they impact then kind of why you want to do it. I can think of just a few people that I've worked with that even them alone would just encourage me to still work in social housing, to continue to have a positive impact on them. I'm
sure all of you have probably come across people in your time that will stay with you for a very long time for many different reasons. Jazz, what have you found so far since arriving into the sector? What have you found so far, and what is it that you love?
I think working in housing is a career with a purpose. So, like, as a housing officer, I deal with people's lives on a daily basis. And that could be like really small things, or it could be completely life-changing things. And I think that's what I love about it. Like, no 2 days are the same. You can come in one day and you just on the go from start to finish. I don't think like clock watching or anything like that is a thing when you work in housing, really. It's just, you kind of look up and you're like, oh my gosh, it's 4 o'clock already. Like, it's that kind of thing where I just love it. I think that there's so many roles within housing, not just like the visiting officers, but the people back in the office as well. And it's just so varied that, like, I know that I learn something new every single day, and I don't think that's ever going to stop, which is what I love, because I just love being challenged on a daily basis.
And challenged, I'm sure you are. Owen, what about yourself? I'm keen to hear, because I know that the sector has probably thrown all sorts of opportunities your way. Just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, look, I suppose in terms of my job, firstly, I'm an allocations specialist, so my main role is to give keys to people. And nothing. I'm
sure it's more than that.
Yeah, well, look, that's predominantly it's the most rewarding feeling for me is putting the keys into people's hands. People have been on a waiting list for 10 to 15 years, single mothers who've been living in hotel rooms with their 3 kids because there is no other alternative emergency accommodation. There's no better feeling than changing people's lives and watching their worries melt away right in front of you when you can make that happen. So that's the most rewarding part of my job, and it's probably the main thing that keeps me there. Now, obviously, so many things have opened up for me in the sector as well. I said to you when I was speaking to you yesterday, Andrew, I like to plug myself a lot on LinkedIn. I'm not afraid to do that. And it has certainly grown organically for me from LinkedIn. I've been invited to join the CIH Futures Board. And we travel around Ireland to different third-level universities, and we try and convince students to take up a role in housing by choice. I also sit on the board of a Irish Traveller Advocacy Group as well, and that has stemmed basically from my role in housing because they were looking for somebody with some sort of insight into traveller accommodation rights in Ireland. So that's another thing that stemmed from that as well. Look, I've spoken at different summits, charity summits, trying to speak about talent retention and acquisition in the housing industry, and it's been very busy in my 3 years only as in housing. So it's all been so rewarding.
I think that just in itself speaks to it alone, doesn't it? Who could have imagined a few years ago when you were doing I think you said a furniture design course, to then a few years down the line, as you say, you've been invited onto sort of panels to speak about so many different options and opportunities. I just think that kind of encapsulates it perfectly, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, it grows really organically anyway, and I had no idea, that I'd be here at this point now.
I think it speaks as well to the fact that I think one of the things the sector does so well is the connectivity element of it. You've just mentioned how your ability to stay connected with people on LinkedIn, but I think obviously the sector meets very regularly at the various different conferences and talks throughout the year. And Elly, would you like to sort of talk about that, about the sort of connectivity of the sector a little bit further?
I've been in housing for 25 years, and through the lens of time, it's easier to kind of see how things kind of grow. And I'm listening to Owen talk there about how he started to get opportunities through LinkedIn, and that is absolutely how I developed much of my opportunities for my career. When in fact it was on Twitter. LinkedIn wasn't used as much then, and Twitter was quite new. People were, what's this Twitter thing? How do you use it? And so it wasn't as well established as it is now. But housing is very much a community within a community, and I can categorically say there are people that I met at the very beginning of my career who have become lifelong friends. So it's such a fantastic, it really is a fantastic place to work. It also creates opportunities. When I look back and think, I left school at 16 and now I'm running a really large organisation, and I've got the privilege of making decisions that affect so many people's lives. Like there may be other professions like that. I can only go from housing, but I can't think of other professions where those possibilities exist. And it's fascinating for me today hearing from younger people because it's so very similar to how I started in my career. And so I can almost see the trajectory and the opportunities that await the people on this podcast that are like further down the line. Really, housing, the world's your oyster. You can do as much or as little as you want to. The opportunities are there. I'm just amazed that we aren't promoting as much as we should be, and hence my campaign.
Brilliant. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think so. Everything that people have shared so far speaks to the diversity of opportunity within the sector, the sense that you're really doing something that makes a difference. Owen just mentioned, obviously, handing the keys over to someone who could have potentially been waiting years. But I think it'd be remiss of us, to not sort of talk about the sector's challenges, because, of course, it's a wonderful place to work, but every day isn't always sunshine and rainbows, I'm sure. And I'm confident that all of you will face challenges on a daily basis. So maybe if we could sort of touch on those for a moment. Jazz, I wonder if you could maybe just give us a bit of an insight into sort of what you've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I said that being a housing officer was easy, because it's not. There are days and weeks where it's chaos, to be honest. It can be where your calendar just gets completely turned on its head. All the emergencies seem to come at once. I don't know if anyone else feels like that, but if one major happens, the whole week's going to be full of them. It's just one of them things, I guess. But it's the challenge that I love, and that's why I think that a career in housing is definitely for me. Like for me, I kind of specialise in extensive housing management. So that's complex cases. I do a lot with mental health crisis, drugs and alcohol misuse, domestic violence. They're kind of my main areas really of expertise. And, I've dealt closely with tenants who have committed suicide or died from drug overdoses and things like that. So it's not easy, and it can be really difficult sometimes, but it's also very rewarding. And I think that when you're in a sector that has the challenges like housing does, that the team around you is extremely important. So I know for a fact, like my association at Barcud, my team is amazing. And it's just little things like if they know you've had a really bad day and you've been out to, you know, for example, like a suicide or something like that, you know, there's a pack of biscuits and a hot coffee waiting for you when you get back.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, obviously you guys are dealing with, and housing associations are an absolute cornerstone of communities. And when you're dealing with communities, as you say, you know, you see the good and the bad. And clearly that's something that the sector reflects very evidently. Patrick, what about yourself? What sort of, what sort of challenges would you say you've faced so far in your career in the sector? Just give us a bit of an insight, if you don't mind.
You know, for me, I'm always looking to progress within any role I'm in. And of course, within my roles, that's always been the key thing for me. I initially joined the sector to really make a change in communities, to make a change in people's lives. So that led me to many different places, initially from a service centre advisor role, which was basically like a housing officer, then moving more into the community support officer. So once I got my foot in the door, I kind of explored and tried to get more into that community development, community investment space, and worked with them. That led me then into engagement and communications, working as a engagement and comms manager. So my thing is always trying to progress, and that's my thing. But within the sector, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, there's many reports about it. It's one of those things where the sector often has a lot of, you know, Black professionals, Asian professionals, you know, people from ethnic minority at junior levels. But when it comes to the leadership board levels, it's a bit tricky to see that representation at that kind of senior roles. And of course, over time, you know, you do see these changes happening, but it's one of those things where I'll say, being part of the sector, you know, opportunities like I was part of CIH Futures, where it gave me the opportunity to speak at conferences and webinars and things that I would never have thought I'd have been able to do when I joined the sector initially. Those opportunities really built my confidence, really built my network, which is really important. Of course, I love a LinkedIn as well. So, you know, kind of sharing all that experience and building a network is such a big thing. So, you know, the sector does have that issue that, to be fair, many sectors across, you know, you know, that's just one of those things. It's a systemic thing. It's not something that's, you know, unique just to the housing sector. So that kind of lack of representation and leadership is one of those things where I would definitely love to see that change in the future. And that's one of those challenges that many Black professionals really do face in the sector. I'm part of a kind of network of Black housing professionals called Housing Got Soul, and we recently are working on a project where we did a big survey with everyone, where we're talking about kind of insights and actions just to see how we could input the data into this project. And a good amount, like 33, 40 people, this is a survey of about 50 people, they all said that they kind of, that lack of representation was a key part for them, and also the systemic barriers, which could look at racism, discrimination. Of course, that can also be a big factor. So, you know, like I said, it's not just unique to the housing sector, but it's something that I think this sector is really focused on, and I can see that over the years. I can see there is those opportunities and that kind of desire to change, but it does take a lot of work. And it's, like I said, it's something that's systemic, so it's not something that can change like that. You know, it's baked in the pie. It's not like an item where you can just, you know, take it off and it's all done now. It's like really in the system of how we all work and live. So I do think the housing sector is working towards making those improvements.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Patrick. And you know, and we've all seen, I think, that many of the boards, as you say, not just within the housing sector, but as a society, are not reflective of the wonderful diverse communities that we have in this country. Elly, what sort of changes would you like to see? But, you know, if we could maybe fast forward till the end of your presidency, and, you know, let's hope that these sort of issues around lack of diversity, particularly in senior levels, have been challenged. But what sort of changes would you love to see?
One of the key messages of my campaign is this is not my campaign. So when we have a CIH president, they have a campaign for a year, and that's like there's a big focus on that for a year. Lara did a really good one a couple of years ago about walking in people's shoes. Jill did one last year about professionalism, and my campaign is about choose housing. But the key message is that this is not my campaign, it is our campaign. It cannot just last for my tenure. So already I'm like 9 months into my tenure, which I can't believe. 3 months in, so I've got 9 months left, which just feels like it's going really quickly. And there is so much to do in this space. There are so many angles to it. Patrick's touched on the race. That's a huge issue for us in housing. You've only got to look at boards and particularly executive teams. I'm on a team that is majority white, and certainly our residents are majority white at Peabody. And these things, they do take time to change, but they're not changing fast enough. So I think diversity is one point. There's a gender point as well, being a female leader. I've had to face some particularly challenging situations throughout my career, and now I'm in a position where I've constantly advocated, but in a position where I have to advocate for more female leaders. I think the biggest thing for me is if the sector can get hold of this and take it as their responsibility to get people to choose housing, to encourage people from different backgrounds, to recruit residents, to recruit people of colour, to recruit women, to recruit young people, and particularly young people, because I don't think we understand at all what the next generation need in terms of housing and in terms of roles. I think we haven't even scratched the surface on that. So if beyond this can grow, and every organisation takes the responsibility themselves and stops complaining that we've got a skill shortage and does something about it, and then allows those people to thrive and to become the leaders of tomorrow, then I think I will have done my work. But really, my message is that it's not down to me, it's down to everybody else.
Yeah, and I think that's so true. Of course, you're not going to change everything over the course of a year, and there is obviously more that I think we as a sector need to be doing individually. So onto that then, maybe not necessarily advice for the sector, because those are some pretty big problems that we've just talked about, and ones that we're clearly not going to solve on a podcast this afternoon. But I think it would be useful to try and come up with some changes that I guess we would like to see, maybe based on some of the experiences of the panel. So Eoghan, I'd like to come to yourself, if we don't mind. So, if you could maybe, based on the last few years that you have had in the sector, as incredible as it's been, and it's clearly given you so much, if you were able to sort of put a challenge to the sector to change in a way, what would you sort of point to?
I'd have advice that would come in kind of in two different types of context. For younger people who are wishing to get into the sector and who are considering pursuing a career in housing, reaching out, I've said it time and time again, but LinkedIn is a great place to reach out and network. I'd strongly advise any young people who are considering to take up a role in the sector to get in touch with other housing professionals who they can see on LinkedIn, to ask those questions, to even go to careers fairs where you might find people who are on the CIH Futures Board who are advocating for careers in housing. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, because a lot of the time people who work in housing will want to help and will want to give you that information because it means so much to them. Then coming from the other side as well, I suppose housing associations and approved housing bodies in Ireland, they could do a little bit better in terms of trying to get people in themselves. It shouldn't just be down to the Chartered Institute of Housing to encourage people to get into the sector. Housing associations should be actively trying to encourage people as well. I suppose in a way that they could bring people in, if you put internships or work experience aside, have open days. Consider doing ride-arounds with your housing officers, bring people out onto housing estates and schemes. Let them see what the role of working in housing entails. Send people out with the community engagement team or the antisocial behaviour team, knock on a few doors and just show them what it really is like, boots on the ground, to work in housing. I think that will then allow people, younger people, to make an informed decision as to why they might pursue a career in housing by choice as opposed to falling into it. And I suppose that's what we want at the end of the day.
Lovely. Yeah, I think, Eoghan, a few people have already touched on so far that when they were growing up, there wasn't that necessarily awareness of that housing associations were even a thing. I think Elly touched on that she'd heard of the council. So is it an issue of exposure? Do people just not know about the sector? And if so, Elly, what do you think? How can we? Owen's just suggested open days. What do you think?
So we are great at talking to each other. We're really good at talking to each other, and that is actually one of our strengths, because we aren't frightened about sharing. We share best practice. We haven't really done enough about talking beyond our own organisations. I think there are some really practical things like careers fairs, but actually we run an event in Peabody in the summer. In fact, we run it every year, where we invite our contractors and our suppliers. They come down, they set up tables. We had a few charities there, one that provides interview clothes, somebody else that helps with interview techniques. We had a computer set up to help with people's CVs, and we had over 1,000 residents that attended that event, and people actually got interviews and jobs on the day. So this is what I mean about action. So I think sort of it's not just enough to go to a careers fair. It's a bit the point that Patrick was making. It's the same with like the diversity issue. Sort of talking about it and sort of doing things on the periphery is not enough. Actually setting yourself some targets and saying, right, actually X% of our workforce are going to be residents, or by X year we're going to have more surveyors, or wherever the gaps are within the organisation. So I think it's definitely got to a point where we've got to be much more proactive, going into schools. Really, everybody on this call could probably contact their local school, go onto a Teams thing for half an hour and talk to sixth formers about what it's like to work in housing. That's the point. It has to be a collective movement to get the momentum that we need. Otherwise, we're just going to keep kind of talking to each other. So that's what I'm hoping I can achieve by the end of this year.
And I'm wondering whether, as one of the big goals you're talking about is trying to encourage more young people. And obviously people obviously want to see, they want to speak to people that they feel reflect themselves. So, I guess maybe the sector's guilty of leaving some of the big strategic decisions to the people in more senior positions, but actually what can younger people be doing within the sector to get out there? I would imagine a sixth former is going to far more likely want to speak to one of the people on this panel today than maybe someone who they just don't recognise in themselves, maybe someone in one of the more senior positions. What do you think?
So we don't have, I would be interested to hear from the panel actually, we don't have enough young people on boards, right? So the problem with boards is they're set out and they are predicated on experience, and that experience is predicated generally on qualifications and how long you've been alive, which is like such a bizarre concept, because the experiences that I learn the most from are from people that have got different experiences from me. So that is young people from with English not as a first language, people that have worked in countries that I haven't worked in. That, I'm thinking about my friend group as well. That's where you learn, right? You don't learn by talking to the same people, and boards are predicated to have older people on them. And I think there's a huge gap, because if we got more younger people onto boards, I'm really confident that there would be quite a lot of different decisions that were made about how we approach things, particularly around careers, because when I went to school is going to be completely different to when everybody on this podcast went to school, and definitely different from when my boss went to school. It's a whole different ball game. So I think we need to hear, and I'm interested from the panel's view actually, about what we can do, like not necessarily how it's different, but what we do need to do to encourage younger people to come into housing. And we're not going to solve it all now, but if there's a couple of points, it would be valuable, I think, to hear them.
I'm just going to throw that one open to the panel. Has anyone got any ideas around how we potentially attract more young people?
Yeah, so one thing that I think my association does quite well is that we've got a trainee housing officer position at the moment. So it's bringing a young person in who's got no experience in housing, and it's a 2-year traineeship where they shadow housing officers and other, not just housing officers even, it's other people within the association. And alongside with that, they complete the CIH level 1 and 2. And I think that it's been really successful for us. And I think that more almost like apprenticeships or traineeships would really help people kind of get into the sector and sort of stay in the sector. And like I've had the trainee coming and sort of shadowing me and things like that, and she's been around everyone really in the last couple of years, and it's just picking up that little bit of information, or someone does something slightly differently, or different ways that roles work and things like that. And I think it's really useful for us especially to have that person that comes in to train. And I think it's something that needs to be more widely offered. Like, as someone who didn't go to university, it was a while, probably a good 18 months after, all my friends went to university and I didn't. It was almost like I just got job rejection after job rejection after job rejection, and it was really disheartening. And I think that we almost need to move away from the generic kind of, you do your GCSEs, you do your A-levels, you go to university and you get a job. I think there is like so many other ways you can get into housing as a sector, especially. And, you don't necessarily have to do the kind of generic university route to be able to get there.
I think you're so right, Jazz. I know where in my organisation we have a great apprenticeship scheme where I think it's about 3 or 4 years, and they spend kind of like anywhere between 3 and 6 months with a different team, and then they move on, and then they move on. And I am so envious of the breadth and the depth of their knowledge. They know so much about housing in the different areas, and you can see it all come together. So I'd definitely encourage anyone to go for an apprenticeship, because they'll just always know more than others because of kind of the different teams they've worked in. And I think maybe back to a point that you were talking about, Elly, is the kind of visibility. It can be really simple. I know in my current role, I've been doing a bit of youth engagement, and only last week I went out to a youth group on one evening, and then the next day we went in and met 2 different schools. And actually some of the students, not even in the kind of workshop that we were doing, have been pestering their teacher for us and the architects that we're working with to come in. So we're now going back in a couple of weeks to go and do like a lunch and learn session with them about what careers are in housing, what careers what does it take to be an architect, and things like that. I think the visibility, and for me, I was living with someone that worked in social housing, and I had still never considered social housing as a role. And I think it's about changing the narrative and kind of the perspective, and it can be as creative as you want it to be, and it is fun, and there's lots of amazing opportunities. And I think there's almost this stereotype of kind of older people being in that career, and I think it's about changing that narrative. And again, it doesn't necessarily come from the top. I think it comes it's best from kind of the bottom up.
People aspire to what they see around them, right? I mean, you can't aspire to something that you've never seen, that is invisible to you. So no, I couldn't agree more. And I wonder whether these experiences, for people at young, children at school of being taken to things and shown careers, I can't help but think the pandemic probably set us a long way back in that regard as well. When people, children in school were not able to go and have employability days, careers days, visit places, I think, that's probably hindered us. But so we're certainly on the back foot, and there's probably a catch up to be played here over the past 5 years. Patrick, I think you may have wanted to come in on something there.
Yeah, just to kind of agree with what everyone said so far regarding apprenticeships. I'm on my level 3 apprenticeship at the moment, and it's a great way of learning so much more about the sector. Most employers are very happy to invest in staff in that way as well. So it's great, and same, just to echo those sentiments. Personally, I think I like to think about retention more in terms of retaining those people that do join. They're really great, and holding them in within the sector. Unfortunately, in the past I've experienced like kind of bullying and behavior that made me consider leaving the sector. And I think a lot of people, when you speak to them from various parts of a workplace, they would have had those kind of complicated, difficult times sometimes where they think, is this the place for me? Is this the job for me? So for me, I like to think about the retention side of it and kind of keeping people in once they join, and think of how we can all doing our bit really to make the sector a better place to really stay. Because I think the average age of a house I think it's probably like 50 something. It's an aging working population, and it's one of those things where, like Elly said many times already, we do need young people to come in, and one of those ways of doing that is, of course, being a lovely place to work. And once again, I don't want to make it seem like it's just the housing sector that has these issues. Many sectors have these issues related to bullying or just concerning practices that you wouldn't really want to see within the sector. But I think if we don't point it out, if we don't try to work on it, it's one of those things that can never really be changed. So it's something that personally I think could be really considered, and just how to make the sector just a better place to work in. Being more flexible, of course, and a lot of people have different things like that, like remote working and hybrid working, and all these different things that could be considered. I'm a new parent. I have two kids. Being luckily where I work, they're very, very understanding and provide a lot of parental benefits and stuff like that. But that may not be the case for a lot of different organisations. So it could look like many things, but that's something that personally comes to mind, really.
And I think it's clearly there's challenges, I think, isn't there, for the sector to change. Eoghan, I just wondered whether you had any sort of final thoughts on advice you would give to the sector to change.
Just in terms of, look, they're all very valid points that the rest of the table has made in terms of retention and encouraging young people to take up a role in housing. I think that the power of a comms team in an organisation should never be underestimated. I'm sure you could probably back me up there, Patrick. Not only for spreading the good word about the work that housing associations do, but also as a potential and as a medium to spotlight their younger staff to the wider world. Kids are younger people these days. It's TikTok, it's YouTube. It's all social media driven, and I don't see why housing associations and housing bodies in Ireland shouldn't be able to kind of plug into those channels and spotlight the staff, the younger staff that they already have working in their organisations. Do a 5-minute video piece on the role of John in community engagement, and put a video up on TikTok. Show younger people who are considering a career in housing what it is, because those are the channels that these people predominantly use. People don't really pick up a newspaper and read about a role in housing. They want to see it on their mobile device in their hands. So I think that's a positive way to do it anyway, in that perspective.
100%. I think as you rightly say, I think we need to get better at ultimately, I appreciate the housing associations and their websites are set up for tenants and and customers, and as they should be. But how are we better engaging with young people out there to put our best foot forward and to show what the sector has to offer people and the incredible work that's going on? I wonder, Elly, what your thoughts are there.
I think there are comms teams can be too cautious sometimes, right? So we operate in a way that is quite old-fashioned in lots of respects. So obviously we have to manage content, and we have to manage brand, and we have to manage message. But actually, we've got very sensible people in our organisations who could create TikToks and put them out there and say, "Hey, I'm out today," and talk about their own role, and we could democratise our comms a lot better. And that's what I think we need to do. We could use the power of people a lot more. And I think that's something that we need to challenge our communication teams around about how they can do that. So we do it quite well internally. We ask people to take a photo and tell us where they've been and all of that. So when you look at intranets, they're usually quite good in terms of like message sharing. We're very cautious about doing that externally. And I think that's a gap, actually. We could democratise things much better if we allow people to tell their own story. And that brings me on to the one thing that I do want people to take away from this campaign is that everybody can do one action that would make a difference. So even sharing this podcast, if everybody on this podcast shares it with 5 people who don't know about housing, maybe people who've got children, so it might not be your friends, but it might be people who've got children who are a bit older, and say, just watch this and just consider a career in housing. That's a starting point. It could be more complicated than that, like going into a school or some of the things we've discussed. But actually, just sharing the message with people that don't know about what we do is everybody's responsibility. I
think that's right. We have to be proactive, don't we? And we're in danger sometimes of social housing being an echo chamber. And of course, we can share these podcasts on our LinkedIn, but realistically, that is followed by people who are already in the sector. So clearly, there's some work to be done, and maybe a challenge for all of us to email this to a handful of our friends, of our families, maybe once we're finished, and hopefully that it'll start having the reach. I just wondered whether anybody else had any sort of closing thoughts, really, about the future of the sector, how we can challenge the sector to grow and evolve. I just wondered if anyone would like to come in finally.
if we want to continue to be the brilliant sector that we are, and we want to continue to sustain our communities into the future, then we need to reflect the communities that we serve properly at every level of the organisation. We need to be changing our workforce so that our workforce is much more locally based, and that is really simple to do. That is so simple to do, and we need to be brave. So we need to move away from traditional ways of thinking about how we communicate the message, and we need to be braver. And finally, and I'm going to reiterate the point, we can't wait for other people to do it. Everybody has to take something away from this and do something, and we can't take it and say, well, I'm going to have a conversation with my comms team. It's just, what can I do today, this week, this year, that might make somebody choose housing. So yeah, that would be my hope.
Brilliant. Well, I think we've got some challenges there and some actions for all of us to take away. Thank you guys for your time, for your input into this. I've certainly enjoyed this experience, and I've certainly gained some wonderful insights, and I hope you all have too.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
So much.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Andrew.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The HIP. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.